a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Kit Carson. Christopher Houston Carson, better known as Kit Carson, was an American frontiersman. He was a mountain man, wilderness guide, Indian agent, and U.S. Army officer. Carson became a frontier legend in his own lifetime via biographies and news articles. Exaggerated versions of his exploits were the subject of dime novels. Carson left home in rural present-day Missouri at age 16 to become a mountain man and trapper in the West. In the 1830s, he accompanied Ewing Young on an expedition to Mexican California and joined fur trapping expeditions into the Rocky Mountains. He lived among and married into the Arapaho and Cheyenne tribes. In the 1840s, he was hired as a guide by John C. Fremont. Fremont's expedition covered much of California, Oregon, and the Great Basin area. Fremont mapped and wrote reports and commentaries on the Oregon Trail to assist and encourage westward-bound American pioneers. Carson achieved national fame through Fremont's accounts of his expeditions. Under Fremont's command, Carson participated in the uprising against Mexican rule in California at the beginning of the Mexican-American War. Later in the war, Carson was a scout and courier, celebrated for his rescue mission after the Battle of San Pasqual and for his coast-to-coast journey from California to Washington, D.C. to deliver news of the conflict in California to the U.S. government. In the 1850s, he was appointed as the Indian agent to the Ute Indians and the Jicarilla Apaches. During the American Civil War, Carson led a regiment of mostly Hispanic volunteers from New Mexico on the side of the Union at the Battle of Valverde in 1862. When the Confederate threat to New Mexico was eliminated, Carson led forces to suppress the Navajo, Mescalero Apache, and the Kiowa and Comanche Indians. Carson was brevetted a brigadier general and took command of Fort Garland, Colorado. He was there only briefly. Poor health forced him to retire from military life. Carson was married 3 times and had 10 children. The Carson home was in Taos, New Mexico. Carson died at Fort Lyon, Colorado, of an aortic aneurysm on May 23, 1868. He is buried in Taos, New Mexico, next to his third wife Josefa Jaramillo. Early life. Carson was born in Kentucky on Christmas Eve, 1809. His parents were Lindsey Carson and his second wife, Rebecca Robinson. Lindsey had had 5 children by his first wife Lucy Bradley, and 10 more children by Rebecca. Kit was their 6th, making him the 11th of Lindsey's offspring. Lindsey Carson had a Scots-Irish Presbyterian background. He was a farmer, a cabin builder, and a veteran of the American Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. He fought Indians on the American frontier, losing 2 fingers on his left hand in a battle with the Fox and Sauk Indians. The Carson family moved to Boone's Lick, Howard County, Missouri, when Kit was about 1 year old. The family settled on a tract of land owned by the sons of Daniel Boone, who had purchased the land from the Spanish. The Boone and Carson families became good friends, working and socializing together, and intermarrying. Lindsey's oldest son William married Boone's grandniece, Millie Boone, in 1810. Their daughter Adeline became Kit's favorite playmate. Missouri was then the frontier of American expansionism west. Cabins were forted, with tall stockade fences to defend against Indian attacks. As men worked in the fields, sentries were posted with weapons to protect the farmers. These men were ready to kill any Indian who attacked. Carson wrote in his memoirs, "For 2 or 3 years after our arrival, we had to remain forted and it was necessary to have men stationed at the extremities of the fields for the protection of those that were laboring." In 1818 Lindsey Carson died instantly when a tree limb fell on him while clearing a field. Kit was about 8 years old. Despite being penniless, his mother took care of her children alone for 4 years. She then married Joseph Martin, a widower with several children. Kit was a young teenager at the time and did not get along with his stepfather. The decision was made to apprentice him to David Workman, a saddler in Franklin, Missouri. Kit wrote in his memoirs that Workman was a good man, and I often recall the kind treatment I received. Franklin was situated at the eastern end of the Santa Fe Trail, which had opened 2 years earlier. Many of the customers at the saddle shop were trappers and traders, from whom Carson heard stirring tales of the West. Carson found work in the saddlery not to his taste. He once stated, "The business did not suit me, and I concluded to leave." Santa Fe Trail. In August 1826, against his mother's wishes, Kit ran away from his apprenticeship. He went west with a caravan of fur trappers, tending their livestock. They made their trek over the Santa Fe Trail to Santa Fe, the capital of Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico, reaching their destination in November 1826. Kit settled in Taos. Carson lived with Matthew Kincaid, a trapper and explorer who had served with Carson's older brothers during the War of 1812. Carson was mentored by Kincaid in learning the skills of a trapper, while learning the necessary languages for trade. Eventually he became fluent in Spanish and several Indian languages. Workman put an advertisement in a local newspaper back in Missouri. He wrote that he would give a 1-cent reward to anyone who brought the boy back to Franklin. No one claimed the reward. It was a bit of a joke, but Carson was free. The advertisement featured the first printed description of Carson, Christopher Carson, a boy about 16 years old, small of his age, but thick-set. Light hair, ran away from the subscriber, living in Franklin, Howard County, Missouri, to whom he had been bound to learn the saddler's trade. Between 1827 and 1829, Carson worked as cook, translator, and wagon driver in the Southwest. He also worked at a copper mine near the Gila River in southwestern New Mexico. In later life, Carson never mentioned any women from his youth. There are only 3 specific women mentioned in his writing: Josefa Jaramillo, his third and last wife, a comrade's mother in Washington, D.C., and Mrs. Ann White, a victim of Indian atrocities. Mountain Man. At the age of 19, Carson began his career as a mountain man. He traveled through many parts of the American West, with famous mountain men like Jim Bridger and Old Bill Williams. He spent the winter of 1828-1829 as a cook for Ewing Young in Taos. He joined Young's trapping expedition of 1829. The leadership of Young and the experience of the venture are credited with shaping Carson's early life in the mountains. During August 1829, the party went into Apache country along the Gila River. The expedition was attacked, being Carson's first experience of combat. Young's party continued on into Atla, California, trapping and trading in California from Sacramento in the north to Los Angeles in the south, returning to Taos, New Mexico in April 1830 after trapping along the Colorado River. Carson joined a wagon train rescue party after entering Taos. And although the perpetrators had fled the scene of atrocities, Young had the opportunity to witness Carson's horsemanship and courage. Carson joined another expedition led by Thomas Fitzpatrick and William Levin in 1831. Fitzpatrick, Levin and his trappers went north, to the Central Rocky Mountains. Carson would hunt and trap in the West for about 10 years. He was known as a reliable man and a good fighter. Life for Carson as a mountain man was not easy. After collecting beavers from traps, he had to hold on to them for months at a time until the annual Rocky Mountain Rendezvous, held in remote areas of the West like the banks of the Green River in Wyoming. With the money received for the pelts, necessities of an independent life included fish hooks, flour and tobacco were procured. As there was little to no medical access in the varied regions he worked in, Carson had to dress his wounds and nurse himself. Conflict with particular Indians sometimes occurred. Carson's primary clothing at the time was in deer skins that had stiffened after being left outdoors for a time. This suit offered some protection against particular weapons employed by Indians. Grizzly bears were one of the mountain man's greatest enemies. A particular incident involving the animals happened to Carson in 1834 as he was hunting an elk alone. 2 bears crossed paths with him and quickly chased him up a tree. One of the bears tried to make him fall by shaking the tree, but was not successful and eventually went away. Carson returned to his camp as fast as he could. He wrote in his memoirs that, "The bear finally concluded to leave, of which I was heartily pleased, never having been so scared in my life." The last rendezvous was held in 1840. At that time, the fur trade began to drop off. Fashionable men in London, Paris, and New York wanted silk hats instead of beaver hats. In addition, beaver populations across North America were declining rapidly from overexploitation. Carson knew it was time to find other work. He wrote in his memoirs that beaver was getting scarce, it became necessary to try our hand at something else. In 1841, he was hired at Bent's Fort in Colorado. This fort was one of the greatest buildings in the West. Hundreds of people worked or lived there. Carson hunted buffalo, antelope, deer, and other animals to feed these people. He was paid $1 a day. He returned to Bent's Fort several times during his life to again provide meat for the fort's residents. Indian fighter. Carson was 19 when he set off with Ewing Young's expedition to the Rocky Mountains in 1829. In addition to furs and the company of free-spirited, rugged mountain men, Carson sought action and adventure. He found what he was looking for in killing and scalping Indians. Carson probably killed and took the scalp of his first Indian when he was 19 years old. During Ewing Young's expedition, Carson's memoirs are replete with stories about hostile Indian encounters with the memoirist. In January 1833, for example, warriors of the Crow tribe stole 9 horses from Carson's camp. Carson and 2 other men sprayed the Crow camp with gunfire, killing almost every Crow. Carson wrote in his memoirs, "During our pursuit for the lost animals, we suffered considerably, but the success of having recovered our horses and sending many a redskin to his long home, our sufferings were soon forgotten." Carson viewed the Blackfoot Nation as a hostile tribe, believing they posed the greatest threat to his livelihood, safety, and life. He hated the Blackfeet, and killed them at every opportunity. Historian David Roberts has written, "It was taken for granted that the Blackfeet were bad Indians. To shoot them whenever he could was a mountain man's instinct and duty." Carson had several encounters with the Blackfeet. His last battle with the Blackfeet took place in spring 1838. He was traveling with about 100 mountain men led by Jim Bridger. In Montana Territory, the group found a teepee with 3 Indian corpses inside. These 3 had died of smallpox. Bridger wanted to move on, but Carson and the other young men wanted to kill the Blackfeet. They found the Blackfoot village and killed 10 Blackfeet warriors. The Blackfeet found some safety in a pile of rocks, but were driven away. It is not known how many Blackfeet died in this incident. Historian David Roberts writes, "If anything like pity filled Carson's breast as, in his 29th year, he beheld the ravaged camp of the Blackfeet, he did not bother to remember it." Carson wrote in his memoirs that this battle was the prettiest fight I ever saw. Carson's notions about Indians softened over the years. He found himself more and more in their company as he grew older. His notions about Indians became more understanding and more humane. He urged the government to set aside lands called reservations for their use. As an Indian agent, he saw to it that those under his watch were treated with honesty, fairness, and clothed and fed properly. Historian David Roberts believes his first marriage to an Arapaho woman named Singing Grass softened the stern and pragmatic mountaineer's opportunism. Brought to you by WikiVidi documentaries. Would you like to know more?